Welcome back, everyone, to New World Fantasy Football. Here to talk about one of Paul's teams, seeing if he feels like they should be firing the cannons or not. Paul, how you doing, man? And how you feeling about your Bucs right now?
Um, Vibes are mixed. There's just a lot of uncertainty. I guess that would be like the word that I would put on the Buccaneers off season completely right now. It's all uncertain. We're going to get into it. Obviously, Baker's contract was a 1-year deal. Big Mike, whatever's going to happen with him, a ton of money, a lot of guys. Of course, we've been talking about this the last couple of years, right? Like guys that were kind of signed in that same kind of 3-year window that we anticipated with Brady, and all of the like contract manipulation that had to get done. Well, the Piper's getting paid now, and they're going to have to move some serious money around to keep the team together. But I would say that like I'm hopeful about it. So I'm not firing the cannons, but I am loading them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. Someone who's not as invested in the Bucs, I mean, I would say it does. It does feel like the, as you said, the Piper is ready to be paid, and they're going to have to make some sacrifices. I do think that they're going to find a way to keep Mike Evans. I think he wants to be there. It's fine to pay a receiver a lot of money, especially a receiver of Mike Evans' stature, where he's been not physical, but just his consistent output year in, year out. He's been a fantastic. I think that he's going to be on his way to be in the Hall of Fame at some point. So he can still do it. He can still play even at, I believe, 30 now, 31, whatever
Yeah,
he is.
he'll be turning 31 this season, and
Yeah.
yeah, man, he's not showing signs of slowing down. Like physically, he's not as fast as he was when he first came into the league, but man, he is just as effective, every bit as effective. And I want him to break Jerry's record. I want him to do it in the Tampa Bay colors. Like I don't want him to do it anywhere else. So that's just kind of my feelings on the matter. And sacrifices are already being made, Andrew. Like Shaq Barrett gone.
Yeah. I heard about that one. That's a big one.
Yeah, it sounds, I think, like a bigger one than it is. He coming off that Achilles tear, he wasn't the same guy anymore. He definitely kind of lost a little bit in terms of his edge rushing. I want to say maybe he only had like 7 or 8 sacks in the last 2 seasons, and edge rush is a premium, right? So losing an edge rusher sucks regardless.
Yeah.
Like even kind of what we think of as maybe an aging edge rusher now. So that sucks, but he was probably the most necessary cap casualty. But without further ado, man, since we're already kind of talking about it and getting into it, I'm gonna try to like broad stroke like the Buccaneers ending the season. Everybody kind of remembers that pretty impressive win over Philly. Maybe not as impressive when you consider just how much Philly was limping into the playoffs, but so be it. And then giving Detroit a game, I thought was decent, but ultimately they ended up 9-8. They were mid. Every metric shows them being fairly decently mid. They had a 23-point differential, so pretty much right on the cusp there. It was good enough to win the sad sack NFC South, but nothing to stroke yourself over regardless. 20.5 points per game, which was good for 20th. They were dead last in total rushing, so 88.8 per game. Woof. They were middle of the pack as a passing offense, 238 per game. It's about 18th. And the defense actually is what really kept them in games, helped them to win games. They won some close games. They were 7th in the league at 19.1 points allowed per game. So that kind of gives you, I think, I believe that's a match pretty much to the eye test. Did any of those numbers surprise you at all?
Honestly, no. I think I will say this. I guess there's one thing that is a little surprising. You wouldn't expect Tampa Bay's rushing attack to be as bad as it is when Rashad White had a very productive season in fantasy. Now we can go over the numbers why. I know we'll get to that. But I think just
Was a little surprising to hear.
you're somebody who's not digging into the numbers might be very, very surprised by that. I'm surprised it's dead last though. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. They ran through the air. They were not a good rushing team whatsoever. Canales, who's gone, I guess that's worth mentioning, right? Because this is the second straight year that pretty much every major member of the offensive staff is getting turned over again. So that's a concern going into next season. We'll see, what happens in that regard. I think Canales definitely, he got a head coaching job for a reason. He did a pretty good job. Hopefully that continues into this next season. But yeah, man, Rashad White, what drove his fantasy value as being a top, 4 running back? Well, volume, first and foremost. Very few running backs get basically workhorse volume, which is what Rashad White got.
Yeah.
All the guys behind him, the Chase Edmonds of the world, kind of blah.
Yeah.
There really wasn't anybody else from that perspective. So what drove his fantasy finish was volume, but also his catches. He really proved himself to be a really capable pass catcher. 64 catches for 549 in the air with 3 touchdowns, 91% catch rate, which is really good for a running back. That's not dropping very much at all. So I think that sums up Rashad White's fantasy prospects, right? He's a pass catcher. He showed really good chops in that area. And he showed some short area wiggle. He showed some ability in open space to get some big gash runs. He actually looked really good down the stretch of the season. But in the totality, when we're talking about just his rushing, he had 990 on the ground at 3.6 a carry. Very pedestrian. A lot of that, Andrew,
That's
had to
Tyler
do.
Algier level. We just talked about Tyler
It is.
Algier. That's where he
It
was.
it is Tyler Algier level without Tyler Algier's offensive line. The middle of the Bucs offensive line was just, it was a
Yeah.
struggle all year.
They lost Jensen really early on, right?
They lost Jensen early on, but honestly, even when we had Jensen, we lost Jensen. It was the skeleton of Ryan Jensen. He was on a fast track to retirement town.
How do you feel about the other toothless ginger that they drafted in Cody Mock?
Malk, I thought he grew as the season went on. Now, is he the next Tristan Wirfs? You know what I'm saying? No, he's not. He's not like the athletic freak that Wirfs is. But I thought he got more solid as the year went on. But spoiler alert for later on in the conversation, that's where I'm looking at in the draft. In the offseason, I'm looking for some just more help in the interior of that O-line. Even if Cody Mauch develops, we still need a lot more beyond that.
Yeah, you're talking to a Giants fan who knows what it's like to be constantly rebuilding a offensive line. So I feel your pain there.
Moving Wirfs over to the left side actually worked out really well for them.
Which is rare for a guy to seamlessly transition from one side to the other. And the fact that he's been able to do that just shows that he's a true football player. He knows how to play O-line, and that's huge.
He's awesome. He's a football sicko.
Yeah, and he should be a lifelong Buck, based on being a prime position and a stud at that position. So
So when it comes to the running game, when it comes to O-line, I'm looking at guards and center. I like our tackles. Obviously, you always need depth at that position. You never know what's going to happen. But between Wirfs and Gedeke, I feel pretty solid on the edges.
Yeah. So back to fantasy though. Let's just run through these running backs, no pun intended. So we know what Rashad White was, and there's really not much to talk about, I think, besides him, because I mean, Chase Edmonds got a few snaps here and there. Sean Tucker was like nowhere to be found. People were talking about him as preseason. Somebody
There's
who
a
might get
reason. There's a
a little bit of
reason
run.
Shad got all that volume, bro. There's a reason.
Yeah. And wow. Crazy season for him. Just being able to be that productive with basically being a no-show on the ground. I mean, just underwhelming on the ground. Although, like you said before, the volume propped that up. So you got
And
any
and the
stats?
field came back down to him too. That's the thing.
Yeah,
Running back was outside of McCaffrey pretty underwhelming this year overall. And I
that's a good point.
unfortunately
Yeah,
think that might be a trend a little
yeah.
bit kind of going forward. But listen, man, with Rachaad White, I know that's kind of probably one of the big fantasy questions going into next year. I don't want to be a homer. I don't want to have this pod just be like, the title of this podcast to be Paul Glazes the Bucs, right? So like, what's your perspective and your expectation for Rachaad White going into next year?
So yeah, I think it's gonna, like a lot of teams and a lot of players. We're recording this before free agency. We're recording this before the draft, so it's going to be very telling what they decide to do um, at that position. I don't think Rachaad White is going anywhere. I think that
No,
somebody
they like
who somebody who is only getting 3.6 yards per carry, yeah, O-line obviously a factor in that. The guys in that building, the coaching staff knows what's going on a lot more than me and you. So I don't know how they feel about him as an actual runner. I believe this is probably the ceiling in terms of his fantasy output. I do think they're going to bring somebody in. It might not be anybody fancy, but a guy that can just, take 7 to 10 carries a game, and it is going to eat into his volume, which is going to ultimately hurt his fantasy value. So that's my prediction going forward. We're going to find out in a few months if that's what they actually do. But I don't think that they want to run him into the ground and give him like what was even his snap count like average? Was he in the 80s like every week? I'd have to
Dude,
imagine.
I mean, bro, he barely came off the field. I don't have it in front of me, but it would shock me if it was below the 80s. It would shock me.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, Sean Tucker would come in to spell him from time to time. Chase Edmonds would take a lot of those situational, obvious passing down, like at times, like maybe if they were doing a gadgety type play. But the reality is, it was all White all the time.
Yeah. And
But
just looking at it briefly, like really quickly, that's pretty much where he was at, about 80% snap
yeah,
average.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's what it felt like. That's what the eye test said. So he was as much of a workhorse as it could be. So my recommendation for Rachaad White, even though I do like him, and I think there's still a path for him to get a little more efficient on the ground as the overall offense and the line gets better. But I would caution anybody with taking him out. I mean, ADPs are worthless looking at right now because we're so early in the offseason. But like, I would not take him anywhere near with the expectation that he's going to finish where he finished this year. I just don't expect that. I do
Yeah.
expect they're going to bring him some help. I believe that like if I were in charge of the Bucs and I was looking at like a future state, I would love to see like a 1-2 running back combo where we work to get Rachaad White more in space. And we had a guy that was a little bit more comfortable between the tackles. But that's
Right.
just me.
Yeah.
They have a lot more money to spend elsewhere, and it starts and maybe ends with the biggest name for fantasy on the Buccaneers, and that's Big Dirty Mike, as we know.
Yeah.
We talked about it. He's going into his age 31st season. The man was a fucking monster last year. 79 catches, 136 targets. Baker was shameless with it.
Yeah.
For 1255 in the air and 13 13 of them. Gold
Yeah.
jacket shit from
It
Mike.
seemed like every Baker touchdown felt like it was going to Mike Evans.
Literally half.
Okay.
Literally half of
Yeah.
Baker's total touchdowns went to Mike Evans.
Right. And then we'll have to see. I don't know if you have that stat on there. How many receiving touchdowns did Rachaad White actually have? So see just where
Three.
this
He had 3. So it was like
so 10.
so
There was only 10 other touchdowns to go around.
pretty much. Yeah. Sorry,
Wow.
Chris Godwin. We'll talk about him in a minute. But yeah, I mean, look, around the red zone, we know where the man's looking. We know what Big Mike does. I didn't do a deep dive of any sort of advanced stats or metrics with Big Mike. We know who this guy is. His resume speaks for itself. I guess when you're looking at Big Mike in terms of fantasy outlook going into next year, I know we got a lot of questions to answer, but what are you like most curious about? Like, kind of like what are your thoughts?
Mike Evans to me is one of those guys similar to like a Larry Fitzgerald back in the day, where just let him, or like a Hines Ward, just let them fade out before you give up on them, because they've proved to be so consistent every year. Some guys get to like, it takes them to get to like the very, very end of their career, and then they're finally just like done. But I don't think it's time for that. That's not Mike Evans just yet. I'm not willing to.
The disrespect last year was wild.
Yeah, yeah. And I think this year he's probably going to be closer to where he should have been. And I don't see why he wouldn't be, especially if they bring Baker back, which I think they're going to have to, right? What other options is Tampa going to have?
Well, they certainly want to, and it sounds like Baker would be like definitely amenable to that. I from everything, and it's from local media, right? So like take it with a grain of salt. Like there's definitely a tendency for the people that cover the team locally to be a little kinder to it. But it seemed like everybody in the building was all about Baker, and Baker was about the team. He came here on a $4 million prove it deal, and he proved it. He had a good year. 4,000 plus in the air. Actually had 28 touchdowns, so my math was a little off. 26 is what I thought, but he had 28 touchdowns against 10 interceptions. 64% completion rating, which, by the way, were all the best numbers in his career. So I think that's pretty significant as well for him wanting to come back. But like, he was a little uneven at times, right? It wasn't always perfect. We know what like the Baker experience is, but I just don't see the Buccaneers not working to bring the best part of their offense back, which was Mike and Baker. And it kind of feels like they're a package deal at this point in terms of like, Baker, I don't think is going to come back to a Tampa Bay team that doesn't have Mike Evans on it. And I don't think Mike Evans is going to come back to Kyle Trask, quite frankly. So, I think that they have to give priority both those guys. And Baker's contract is gonna look scary, right? We're probably looking at an AAV of close to 30. And to somebody that just looks at the name Baker Mayfield and sees that number, they're not gonna like it. And maybe with incentives, it might even climb like higher than that. I don't think they would guarantee all of it. I don't think it's going to be a particularly long deal. But at the end of the day, Andrew, the name of the game at quarterback is you got to pay the motherfuckers. And the dude played a good quarterback for us, and I want them to bring him back, and I want them to pay him.
Yeah, and I think that there's one motherfucker that's actually a motherfucker, Zach Wilson, who's not going to get paid. But
no, he's not.
But I think that your number is actually pretty far off. I think he's going to get 40 plus, because the quarterback position is just that expensive, as you just said. And I'm going to go ahead and compare this to a Daniel Jones, because that's what I know. They gave Daniel Jones a 40 million AAV, and that was last year, where they made the playoffs, they won a playoff game, and they kind of hands were tied at the quarterback position. So it's like, do we go back to a backup level player or draft a guy that we don't feel super confident in, whoever's there late in the first, whether that's a Penix or a Bo Nix or whoever else, Spencer Rattler or something like that.
They're not going to do that.
They're
I can
not.
tell
They're
you,
going to
like, I
pay
can tell
Baker.
you, like, where the team is with its like age situation on most of these guys. They're not going to do that. You know what? Maybe it does get to 40, but like again, these quarterback contracts are always a little bit deceiving, right? Like in terms of like what it looks like when it comes through on Twitter versus what it looks like in reality. But it's just going to be tough. Moving the money around on this team is going to be tough.
The devil's going to be in the details with that. I'm sure they're going to do backloaded type thing. Maybe they give him a 3 or 4 year deal, because that's also an issue with that QB market. Is it's the opposite of the running back market, where the running back market's saturated and the QB market is scarce. There's only a handful of ways you can acquire a quarterback, and then they've also got to be a good player that fits your team. And the Bucs just can't let Baker go. He played too well for that team, and the team wants him back. The players want him back. They're going to pay him what it takes. I don't think, I have no idea who Baker Mayfield's agents are, but I don't think they're going to play super hardball, but they're not going to take a low ball offer either. So
no.
I think he's getting around 45.
You know, and again, if that's what it costs to have stable quarterback play, then that's what it costs. Is what it is. I'm not like, I know there's some fans out there that want us to like try to like, oh, we're gonna trade up for a quarterback, or we're gonna get one of these potential guys later in the first. I don't want to do all that, because then that's how you end up like the Steelers with Kenny Pickett. Baker has his flaws. I don't see him as the forever quarterback, but the dude isn't he's like 27 years old, right? Like he's not ancient.
No.
I think a 3-year deal for Baker to see what this core and this group can do together, I think is completely reasonable. I don't have a problem with that. Now, where's that money going to come from? Here's like the fun part. Again, obviously DST is a part of fantasy. We don't necessarily talk about players on the defense too much, but I will just quickly fly through some of the names that we're looking at on defense or everywhere on the team, really, because we just can't pay everybody, and there's going to be some casualties. Yeah. So this is an outlook of free agents right now. So you got names like Devin White, Levante David, Antoine Winfield. Obviously, Baker and Mike, we already talked about them. Russell Gage and Chase McLaughlin. Russell Gage, see ya. He's gone. He got hurt. He was declining in skills in any case. And then if you ask me, Andrew, Devin White is see ya too.
Yeah.
I know that like typically you would want to keep the younger linebacker, like Levante is on like kind of the back nine of his career, but he was just a more effective player. Devin White had like an amazing 2-year run after getting drafted. He did help us win a Super Bowl, but he's bad in coverage. Not a great vibes guy from what you hear like around the team. And if you ask me between him and the rest of those names, we cannot lose Winfield. Cannot happen.
Yeah, exactly.
He's like the same way you said Tampa has no choice to bring back Baker. We have to bring back the quarterback of our defense. Like we have no choice but to put resources into that. And maybe it'll take a franchise tag. I don't know. But that's several of those names are not going to be around anymore because of the potentially incoming Baker and Big Mike deals. Any observations in there that you wanted to get into? Because I know there's one more fantasy player that I feel like we're forgetting right now.
Not too much. I think you have a better feel of the heartbeat of the Bucs than I do, and I agree with you. It's just they're in a situation where they're going to have to make sacrifices, and the question is where and who. Who do they sacrifice? It's just part of the game in the NFL with the salary cap. So I'm guessing you want to talk a little bit about Mr. Chris Godwin.
Yeah, we kind of forgot about him, but that's appropriate because it seemed like the fantasy community kind of forgot about him after a pretty forgettable season. Like I was actually surprised that he climbed up over 1,000 yards because it didn't feel like it. The man only had 2 touchdowns.
Yeah,
Big
everyone
Mike
loves
was
touchdown.
greedy. It feels like it was just like a multitude of different things. It obviously Baker just had a better connection with Big Mike, and he has a tendency to feed the big dog. But also when I dove a little bit deeper, it also kind of makes sense from just historically with Chris Godwin. He only lined up in the slot for about a third of the plays this year, and that's not Chris Godwin's style. He's generally been 60% plus out of the slot. Traditionally, that's where he does his damage. He's that kind of guy. Like he finds those soft spots in the zone and has the ability to kind of make people miss when there's opportunities to make people miss. And yeah, he was coming off of a kind of an injury filled season, the second season after an injury season. So I think it was just kind of like a weird combination of that. Plus, here's the shittier part of it, Andrew, that you're an outside receiver that doesn't get looked at deep. I think that's one of the worst positions to be in from a fantasy football perspective. It's you get the lower hit rate of being on the outside, but your ADOT's 9.7. Pretty blah, pretty pedestrian. So
yeah, it's very Adam Thielen like.
Yeah. And late season Adam Thielen.
Exactly. He was getting peppered early on, especially from the slot. But yeah, it was overall an underwhelming season for Godwin. Him and Mike Evans were drafted in a very similar position this past year. They went pretty close to each other, maybe one round apart, and just an astronomical difference in results. So yeah, if you ended up with Mike Evans, you were ecstatic. If you ended up with Godwin, you were really butthurt about that.
Yeah, and
Godwin
guess who made the wrong decision in one league? It was dumb. It was a dumb pick. It was a FOMO pick. Big Mike got taken, and I just felt like I wanted a piece of that Tampa offense, but it wasn't good. It was not great. But Liam Cohen, new OC, he is promising to put Godwin back in the slot some more this year. So I think that's promising for fantasy going forward. How's your initial early off-season vibe feeling on Godwin for next year?
Honestly, not too good, and I'll tell you why. I'm going to transition this a little bit. How I feel about Godwin has more to do with how I feel about Trey Palmer. And I think Trey Palmer has a chance to be just one of those contributors for fantasy. Now, I'm not saying he's going to be a wide receiver 2 every week, but I do think he's somebody that's going to be flex consideration. He's going to be rostered, maybe not drafted, but I think there's going to be a point where he's going to be just as effective, if not more effective, than Chris Godwin, because I just think that speed is going to be a weapon. I don't know anything about Liam Cohen, but I know about the NFL, and the NFL loves speed, and he's got it. a lot more than Chris Godwin does. So you saw late in the season too, he was on the field a good bit and he made some big plays. That's another explosive plays are how you win games in the NFL. He's a guy that can provide that. So
Yeah,
I
I
think that's
had it.
going to cut into Chris Godwin a good bit.
Yeah, I had his name down too. He flashed some, particularly late in the year, and I see him as a guy like again. There's just not that much room on this team for like another like big time blow up, sexy player in terms of like
Baker can't
receiver.
support both like to that
Right,
level.
right. But like I do think that he eats up in a little bit into Godwin. If Godwin's ADP drops savagely from this disappointing year, he might still be a value in PPR leagues. But yes, Trey Palmer's a name to watch. Another name to watch going into next year is Cade Otton. He
Oh,
same,
talking about tight ends.
yeah,
I'm proud of you.
I know. Here we are, dude. Apparently, I only talk about tight ends on the teams that I like. I think that's where we are. But look, is he going to be Travis Kelce? Is he going to be like a Sam Laporta? No. Again, there's not enough of that passing pie, to go around. But Cade looked good. Yeah, you rapport with Baker. If we run everything back, if Cohen does what I think he's going to do based on what I'm hearing, which is a little more opening up of the playbook, a little more like 3 receiver type of stuff. Like I think that he could be a guy sneakily that just could be a top 12 candidate to look at. I don't, I wish I could give you a little bit more sensationalism around Cade Otton. I just don't think that he's going to be that type of player. But something to watch.
I think what you can really hope for with Cade Otton is that he is a top 10 tight end, but he gets there by way of consistency, where it's like, okay, if he's getting you a minimum, I mean, this sounds bad, but 6 points in a half PPR league, 7 points, and where that touchdown brings him up to this the 13, 14 point threshold. That's kind of how he's going to have to do it, because he's not going to be a big play guy. He's not going to be catching, 3 touchdowns a game.
The Freiermuth vibes versus the Sam Laporta vibes.
Yeah, I mean, Sam Laporta's just different. He gets targeted down the field a lot, and he's somebody who can make guys miss at that size. Like, I don't see Cade Otton being that type of guy. He's kind of a steady Eddie. So, but I like it. I like a late flyer on a tight end that's going to be on the field a lot and that has rapport with the quarterback that we're assuming coming back. And I would put money that Baker's back with the Bucs. So
I'm definitely I'm confident that Baker is coming back, and I'm hopeful that Big Mike is coming back. That's where I'm at right now.
I think when it's all said and done, they're both going to be in Tampa.
Then we keep on rolling, and I think that at this point, when I think we're ready now for like the preview. I'll let you go first, since I've done all the talking. But I think if that's the case, I think we can expect pretty much more of the same.
Yeah, I'd say so. I think what we're seeing right now, it's a funny phenomenon, because we're gonna be wrapping up the NFC South here pretty soon with our next episode. But I think what we're seeing with the NFC South is, besides Carolina, you've got 3 teams that are all kind of just log jamming. Great movie if you haven't seen Log Jamming from The Big Lebowski.
Deep cut. That's a
Log
movie
jamming.
reference within a movie reference.
It's one of the best. But 3 teams that are really just fighting to just win by a nose. And that's what we've seen the last few years with that division, because they're like, okay, you make the playoffs, anything can happen. We win the division, anything can happen. The Bucs just beat the Eagles in a playoff game. And Okay, yeah. You said it earlier. They gave Detroit a pretty good fight. Like, you really never know. It's football, so you just got to make the dance. But I think all three teams are kind of like in that a bit of an arms race, but it's like nothing spectacular. They're just like just enough to beat the other guy.
Yeah, it's
So we're gonna see a lot of that in this division where it's like it's kind of status quo. You know what I mean? Going forward, because they're all those three are pretty talented teams with major flaws. Like pretty much quarterback is that whole division is like nobody is gonna really scare you. You
yeah,
know?
nobody has an elite quarterback. The Bucs got the best quarterback play out of the division, but like, that's the oh man, the D student out of F students, to put it mildly,
Yeah, for
right?
the quarterbacks, yeah, I'd say Baker was more of like a C plus,
Yeah,
B
I
minus.
was being I
But
was being
yes, I get what you're
facetious.
saying. It's splitting hairs there, and this division is just trying to just beat everybody else out by a little bit, and that's how the Bucs won the division. So I think going forward next season, let's finish up with this. I think next season we're gonna see, because I'm thinking about next year's like draft for redraft purposes. Um, we're gonna see Mike Evans be a little bit overinflated just because touchdowns do that, and 13 touchdowns for a wide
That's
receiver in a
hard.
season
That's hard to
is a
do.
lot. Now he is notoriously good at scoring touchdowns, but 13 is still quite a lot. Um,
But you can always put him down for
for
1,007.
1K. Yeah.
1,007 every time.
Yep. So he might be overdrafted a bit, but I don't even quote unquote overdrafting him isn't going to be a bad pick. It's just not going to be a value pick. Chris Godwin, I think he's going to be really far down just based off how he did this year. And honestly, I don't want any part of Chris Godwin next season. I just think that he's going to not be a major part of the offense again. I think he's going to start getting, I don't want to say phased out, just not being as integral to the offense as he once was. I think that, like I said earlier, Trey Palmer could be a value. I think that Cade Otton is somebody who's more of a streamer level, who's probably going to go
Yeah.
undrafted or very low, like I'm the last person to pick a tight end kind of guy. If people are picking backup tight ends, okay, I guess I'll pick Cade Otton. He's kind of in that. And Baker, hey, I won a championship with Baker. I've always loved Baker, but once
Don't
again,
draft Baker.
he's not a draftable type player. He's more of a,
If
he's
he gets hot, stream him.
he might be drafted to rosters on the very last couple rounds or left undrafted. I mean, that's what we're looking at with Baker.
And
But yes, streamer, absolutely. And good matchups at home, absolutely.
I like the overall outlook of the Bucs in this division. I think they're going to have as good of a chance to win it as anybody. It wouldn't shock me, even though I'm a fan, but it wouldn't shock me if they took a mild step back. It just wouldn't. A couple of the
Especially
games they
defensively.
won were 50-50, and they're still in a scenario where like they're doing the soft reset. This like they didn't do the thing, which I'm happy they didn't. They didn't do the thing where you just tear the whole thing down to the nubs after Brady goes out of town, draft a quarterback in the top 2, and then go from there, right? Like they're not doing that thing, but you can see over the last 2 seasons there are still some veterans, but they're working along some highly drafted young players as well. So I think they're trying to retool the roster as we go. So we're not doing like a preview of records or anything like that, but like, it wouldn't shock me if they ended up 8-9 next year and just barely get edged out by somebody. It wouldn't shock me.
Yeah, that division is going to come down to the divisional games because they are so close. And they won this year having the same record as the Saints, who we're talking about next. So be ready. But I think that scenario is going to play out again. It's going to be a tie at somewhere. And we'll see. We'll see who ends up having the strength of schedule and whatever it is, the tiebreakers and whatnot to go forward in the playoffs. Anything else you want to say about your Bucs before we sign off here?
Fire the cannons.
Fire the cannons. Yep.
Later on, peeps.
See if they can grab some pirate booty across the street at Mons Venus.
Nice.
I think they changed the name
another
now.
good deep cut.
Raymond James, right across the street, man.
I think we'll just leave it at that.
You're either going there to celebrate or going there to cry. Either way, you'll be happy. So, all right, everybody. Peace out. And we'll be back soon talking about the New Orleans Saints.